Hey everybody, welcome into another episode of Hot Routes, the new look, new sound Hot Routes. If you're watching live on YouTube, welcome. This is not anything unusual for you to see me here at 8 o'clock, but if you are listening on the podcast feed, this is our new Hot Routes, the relaunch featuring one of my great friends and the Hot Routes GOAT, Manny Hill, a former teammate of mine at 1500 ESPN. And of course, we go to Lynx games together. We do hot routes together. You're one of the best, Manny. What is going on, my friend? Are you excited for the relaunch of Hot Routes?
I'm ready for some routes, baby. Let's go. It's been way too long. The season is upon us, getting underway on Thursday, and I'm excited to be doing this a couple of times a week with you during the season. It's going to be a lot of fun.
That's right. It will. So Monday nights will be you. Tuesday, Jonathan here on the channel. And then Thursday, also you. And so if you want to hear all the shows, make sure you go to the Hot Routes iTunes feed, because there's also going to be an additional one there with Marcus Whitman, who is a great football content creator. So each week we're really leaning all in to the Hot Routes. And if you don't know what that is because you're new here or you just found us through the YouTube page, basically it's five-ish questions that we come up with that have a little bit of different angles and fun ways to talk about the Minnesota Vikings and the National Football League. And of course, your participation in the comment section is welcome, whether it's Vikings questions or NFL comments or answering our questions. Anything you got, we will address all that as well. But Manny, I think we should just dive right in here. And one of the essence of Hot Routes is I guess analyzing the world at large of football. It's more than just what the Vikings are doing here locally, but the things that we see going on Twitter or around the league or news stories that we want to touch on. And so what I want to start out from you is, because we haven't talked in a little while on the show for a hot route, is it's a long off season. They haven't played football since February. I want to know what the most insane offseason take that you saw on the internet or heard on TV or the radio. What was the most absurd and ridiculous opinion that you heard this offseason?
I love this question. The one that immediately came to my mind was, it was a few weeks ago on First Take, and everybody's buddy Stephen A. Smith. They were talking about the Jets because, of course, they're always talking about the Jets on ESPN. And Stephen A. basically, he posed a question to the rest of the panel, and he was so worked up, and he was basically, he said, "Who do the Jets have besides Aaron Rodgers?" And I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute, this was a team that, for the most part, was a pretty talented roster, and the only thing that was holding them back last year was the fact that they didn't have a quarterback. They had really terrible quarterback play last year. And Aaron Rodgers was supposed to be the last piece to a puzzle that was already almost put together, a defense that was really good with a lot of young talent. You have the offensive and defensive rookies of the year on the team. This is a team that's really talented and ready to go. So, yeah, Stephen A. Who else do the Jets have? They have Sauce Gardner, who's pretty good. They have Garrett Wilson, who's pretty good. They have a lot of really other good players on that defense. They added Dalvin Cook in the offseason as well. A few weeks ago. So it's not just Aaron Rodgers. I know you love your guy, but it's not just him. The Jets are lined up to be pretty good this year.
Yeah, and they have a pretty good coach, I think, in Robert Saleh. And I guess I wish that Hard Knocks had maybe given him a little more run instead of the whole thing just being, hey, Aaron Rodgers might be cool. He's not. Breaking news. But they tried really hard to make it sort of seem that way on Hard Knocks. For me, the most absurd opinions all were regarding Justin Jefferson. And there was at least two, maybe three that I can remember. One was from a CBS Sports host, Andrew Perloff, I think his name is. He said that Jefferson is a product of the Vikings system and not his talent, which is funny because he's been in multiple different systems and dominated the entire time. So that's a weird one. I saw that Christian Watson has a higher ceiling than Justin Jefferson. He just had one of the great seasons in NFL history. I don't know what there is a higher ceiling. Jerry Rice is the only higher ceiling. Randy Moss is the only higher ceiling than Justin Jefferson. He is the ceiling. Okay. No one has a higher ceiling. There isn't a single player in the league that has a higher ceiling. Like, you're number one, you're the best player at your position. So that was easy to figure out. And then there was George Pickens actually has more talent than Justin Jefferson, but he just has to put it together, which also doesn't make a lot of sense because Justin Jefferson was a 97th percentile athlete and one of the great college seasons in recent memory when he was at LSU. This dude can jump like crazy. He's fast. He runs a 4.4. He has flexibility. He has toughness. He has there isn't anybody who really matches this skill set, which is why he's the best wide receiver in the league. But you've made it, Manny, when the world at large is saying, I don't know, maybe this other guy could be him. Sort of like when you and I were growing up, it was like, this Tracy McGrady. Can he be like the next Jordan? Like, no, actually he can't. What about, is maybe this other quarterback a little better than Mahomes, actually? No, they're not. So that was, I mean, of all the absurd takes, that was probably the one. Those were the ones that topped is people trying to use Justin Jefferson to make some point about some other guy.
It always amazes me about how when a player, and we see this in any sport, right? Like, when a player is like fully established as the best at his position or just like the best player in the league, there's always somebody that has to come in, a pundit, an expert, whoever, that has to like question it, like, well, I don't know, maybe it's this guy instead. We're seeing it. I mean, in the NBA, we know Nikola Jokic is the best player in the NBA right now, but there's always going to be somebody that says, well, Giannis, I think it might be Giannis. And it's like, no, it's Nikola Jokic right now, and it doesn't need to be a discussion on it. It's okay. We can go a year without debating these things. It's all right.
Well, what is LeBron's legacy? That's what we're really going to talk about here on Hot Routes. And, Bob makes a good point here just about, some of the networks, are they even real takes or scripted to fight each other? And I mean, there's definitely some of that. But my point is just that it's a long off season. And so eventually people just work their way into some of the craziest takes by the end because they are just so absolutely desperate. I didn't see this one, but Kenny Pickett over Jefferson. What was that? Was that in like some sort of ranking of all players or something? The Kenny Pickett hype is really rolling along. That might be. Oh, I think I saw something like that. Like Kenny Pickett's ceiling is Mahomes or something, and there's a lot of them. Well, Pittsburgh's always a place that's talking themselves into it. So but it was a fun off season from that perspective, and we will hope for many, many more insane takes along the way. So let's get into this Vikings and Bucks matchup, Manny. You dug this up. The 57th meeting of the old NFL or NFC Central matchup between the Vikings and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Favorite memories of Vikings Bucks, and also who are the coolest Bucks in your opinion?
So my number one Vikings Buccaneers memory will always be 1998, week 1, the debut of Randy Moss Mania, man. And for me, it always stands out because I was at that game and I was fortunate enough to sit in one of the suites at the Metrodome, one of the end zone suites, and it just so happened to be the end zone where Randy Moss caught his first touchdown in the National Football League. The one where he caught the deep pass from Brad Johnson. It was like a 50-yard touchdown, and he kind of like caught it and kind of bobbled it at like the 2-yard line, but stuck with it and ended up catching it in the end zone for his first touchdown. And that was right towards the end where I was sitting in the suite. And so that one always kind of stands out to me. Another one that kind of sticks in my mind is when the Buccaneers came to the Metrodome in 2012, when Adrian Peterson won the MVP. And the Bucs ended up winning the game, But there was a moment, I think, in like the third quarter where Jared Allen gets into it with, remember Donald Penn, the left tackle?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, pretty good player, made a couple Pro Bowls, I think, with the Buccaneers and the Raiders. And him and Jared Allen kind of get into a little scuffle or whatever. And he was, they were kind of locking arms and going at it, and they get into a little bit of a fight. They calm things down, and on the next play, Jared Allen beats Donald Penn and gets a sack on the very next play on third down to force a fourth down, and it kind of hyped the crowd up. And the Vikings kind of needed it at that moment of the game because the Bucs were kind of taking it to them, and Tampa Bay ended up winning that game. But those are the couple of moments that stick out in my mind of Vikings Buccaneers moments.
Love this one from Sloth. Favorite memories when the Bucs won the division more recently than the Lions. Yeah,
that's right.
Good times.
And they're not even good times anymore.
So anytime there's Lions hype, we can always bring that up, I suppose. For me, well, it's the game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers where Case Keenum showed that maybe there was a little magic in Case Keenum. And I know this isn't a huge throwback here, but from me covering the team, this was one of the matchups that I remember really well because it was Jameis Winston and it was a Bucs team that was kind of not really all that exciting. But they came in after the Vikings had lost to Pittsburgh, and we were thinking, like, I don't know, like, what's going to happen here? I mean, if Case Keenum struggles, are they going to have to try to find another quarterback, or what's going on with Sam Bradford? We have no idea. And I believe Case Keenum threw for like 360 yards, including a couple pop flies that Stephon Diggs came down with. I think there was one where it just floated over the middle and Diggs jumped over a guy and then there was no one behind him. Maybe a little bit predictive of what would eventually happen in the future with a throw from Case Keenum to Stephon Diggs that went for a long touchdown. But it was that game. And it was one of the great single game performances statistically for any Vikings quarterback in history, which is, again, just wild since it was Case Keenum. But, I think that that game was a little bit of, oh, you know what? This Vikings offense could actually operate with Case Keenum as their quarterback and could have, something to it. So that was the one that stuck out to me. Now, as far as favorite Bucs or coolest Bucs of all time, and there's a lot of nominations here, but I have to start with Mike Allstott just for the brand.
Yes.
I mean, number one. But the thing about Mike Allstott that was really cool is not only the neck roll, but this man was a real running back / fullback, which we just don't see anymore. The handful of running backs or the fullbacks that still exist, most of them are just blockers, like a CJ Ham. And every once in a while, they hand them or throw them the ball. But Kyle Juszczyk is really the only guy who is used as an offensive weapon. But he was blocking for another nomination, which is Warrick Dunn, one of the coolest players in Bucs history. He was blocking for him every play, but then he could run for several hundred yards if he wanted to. He stole all those touchdowns. If fantasy football was bigger then, people would have hated Mike Allstott for stealing all of those touchdowns. I mean, I think that he has a great nomination for being the coolest Tampa Bay Buck of all time.
I like those. I like those a lot. Derek Brooks was one of mine. Derek Brooks was kind of like the sort of the quasi leader of that great defense. You know what I mean? I mean, Warren Sapp was, the boisterous, sort of mouth of that defense, the guy that always kind of talked and had a lot of character. And John Lynch was the physical, hard-hitting safety. Rondé Barber was just the guy that always seemed to make a big play when they needed it. And Derek Brooks was kind of like just that steady leader at that middle linebacker spot, getting the pick six to put a capper on that Super Bowl. Just a great player, and of course in the Hall of Fame now. Simeon Rice was another one that kind of stood out to me because he was a guy, you go back and look at his numbers, especially like that 5 or 6 year period he was with the Buccaneers. He was consistently racking up sacks year after year. You're just looking, it's like 12 sacks, 13 sacks, 15 sacks, 14 sacks, 5 or 6 years in a row. And he was always kind of a weird sort of kind of a quirky guy too. Had a little bit of an odd personality, but He was an excellent pass rusher. And then one guy that I remember that unfortunately did not play long enough to be a part of the Super Bowl team was Hardy Nickerson, man. Hardy Nickerson was one of the early, really great players on those Bucs defenses with Tony Dungy in the mid to late 90s, and made a couple of Pro Bowls and was an all-pro linebacker for them. So those are my three. Honorable mention, Gene Deckerhoff, the play-by-play voice of the Buccaneers, man. He's one of my favorites, and he's been doing it for like 30-plus years, been the voice of the Bucs. He's awesome. Love him. I think he does Florida State football, too, as well. So he's kind of honorable mention as coolest Buck as well.
The Bucks are kind of funny, Manny, because they have so many horrible years in their history and then Super Bowls. And it's just a weird franchise where the Vikings have so many really good years and then not Super Bowls. I would also throw out there, I think Brad Johnson was a pretty cool Buck. I don't know if people in Minnesota were happy for Brad Johnson when he won the Super Bowl, but I feel like they should have been. He was a pretty solid Vikings quarterback, and then he went to Washington and he was good, and he went to Tampa Bay and he was good, sort of the ultimate game manager, and didn't get any credit because that defense was what it was. So it was sort of the Trent Dilfer, Brad Johnson, any quarterback can win a Super Bowl kind of thing. But I think he became underrated for that. I mean, Brad could really sling it. He was a good quarterback and a guy who is on the Vikings coaching staff. And I will unbiasedly say that he is cool as heck, which is Keenan McCardle. Keenan McCardle was a great Buck, but also I've had a chance to sit down with him a few times and have conversations about Vikings receivers, and he is as cool as you would have thought as a player. So they have a pretty fun history of random players. Hardy Nickerson is a great pull. I was thinking about like Eric Rett, who had his very short run. Yeah. So it kind of depends on how old you are that you could go back to some bad teams that had some pretty cool players. What about Bob mentions a quote from a defensive back of the Buccaneers after that Moss game, where they asked him if he was already great. And the defensive back said, he isn't the greatest wide receiver yet, but he will be. And I mean, yeah, right away. It didn't take very long for Randy Moss to prove it. So that is absolutely at the top of the list. Let's see. Hold on. We're making one of the issues I have is always scrolling with the comments. Vinny Testaverde, he was not a cool Buck. He had a horrendous Bucks career, but he became super cool. Like over his career, I thought Vinny Testaverde became an awesome, quarterback. He had that 12-win season for the Jets. He played pretty well for the Browns one year and had this really cool journeyman career. But yeah, for the Bucks, he threw like 40 interceptions. CJ mentions, of course, John Lynch, Rondé Barber finally getting his attention. One-time Viking Warren Sapp, and I only say that because they could have drafted him, and it's one of those big what ifs. Let's see, Leroy Salmon, Mr. Tampa Bay. Yeah, that's going back right there. Hardy Nickerson. Tony Dungy defenses were great. Warwick Dunn was a great player. Here's a pull. Jeff Garcia, one-time Tampa Bay Buck. That's a good one. Yeah. And someone else, Mike Allstott is one of everyone's all-time favorites, I think. And someone asked, and I lost it in the scroll, about Vita Vea and the Vikings playing him this week. Maybe he won't be one of everyone's favorite Bucks after this week, because I don't know what you think, Manny, about this Bucks defense facing the Bucks offensive line. Or I'm sorry, you know what I mean? Bucks defensive line, Vikings offensive line. I feel like that's the biggest matchup that will determine this game, aside from Bucks receivers and Vikings corners. But if we're doing like a hardcore matchup, Vita Vea, if they can slow him even a little bit, you've got a shot. If you can't, the man is going to blow up this game.
Yeah, and we know about the recent history of the last half decade or so of Vikings interior defensive or interior offensive linemen going up against big physical interior defensive linemen. Vita Vea kind of falls into that same category. They've got to find a way to contain him, and they can't have any mistakes. You can't have Ed Ingram tripping Kirk Cousins on a drop back. And Ezra Cleveland's got to be sound and solid, and Garrett Bradbury can't get blown up and pushed backwards. So That's going to be tough, man, because Vita Vea he's a monster, man, and we know the Vikings have a history of struggling against guys that are that big and that physical on the interior defensive line.
Yeah, I mean, he kind of reminds me of Dexter Lawrence, who last year annihilated them and caused some major problems during the playoff game. Of course, maybe some of you remember how it ended with a pressure from Dexter Lawrence. I don't know. It hasn't been mentioned. On to the next hot route, which week one matchup is actually a preview of either championship weekend or the Super Bowl. So let's say I went forward in a time machine and I came back for hot routes tonight and I said, Manny, I've seen the future. One of these week one matchups is actually happening on championship weekend or the Super Bowl. If I told you that, which week one matchup would that be?
I think the easiest one to think of would probably be Bills Jets, right? I mean, with all the hype with the Jets, with Aaron Rodgers, he's supposedly the missing piece, the one piece that they need to become Super Bowl contenders because they have everything else, it seems like. And then the Buffalo Bills have been a team that's been kind of knocking on the door, one of the best regular season teams that we've had in the last 3 or 4 years. But they've always, come up short, whether it's losing to Patrick Mahomes a couple of times or getting beat by Cincinnati last year in the divisional round. Those seem like two teams that you would think, okay, if they end up playing each other somehow in the AFC Championship game, I could see that happening. But I've thought about this, Matthew Coller. What if it's Lions Chiefs in the Super Bowl? I mean, come on. We know the Chiefs, it's a pretty good chance the Chiefs will get back to the Super Bowl because they have the greatest player in the world, right? And one of the great coaches of all time. But what if the hype of the Detroit Lions is real? What if it becomes a real thing? We've seen Jared Goff take a team to the Super Bowl before. It's not unheard of. What if it's, I don't know. What if it's Lions Chiefs? I don't know.
Then a lot of people who made fun of the Lions, including us earlier, would have to eat some words. I think, the thing is, I mean, yeah, I can't really see the Lions making the Super Bowl because Lions, and it just seems so impossible. But whenever this comes up, I think about how close the Buffalo Bills were to beating Kansas City. They were 13 seconds away. All they needed to do was make one stop. They couldn't make it, and they end up losing in the championship game. But or was that
that was divisional?
It was divisional. But the championship game would have been what, like against the Browns or something. I forget exactly how that went. But they would have been going. They would have been going to the championship weekend after that, and would have had a great chance to go to the Super Bowl. My entire life growing up, the Buffalo Bills were an absolute laughingstock. They were irrelevant. They were terrible. They had bad ownership that made horrible decisions, like drafting Willis McGahee when he was hurt. Willis McGahee when he had ripped his knee apart, and they weren't sure if he was ever going to play again, and they took him in the first round. Like stuff like that is unconscionable. They let go Jason Peters. They brought in London Fletcher and immediately let him go. Like they did all sorts of stuff. They drafted JP Losman. They tried Trent Edwards for a while. I've got a lot of damage from watching that team. And yet now they're great and they compete every single year. So just because you are a disaster franchise does not mean you have to remain that way, just like with the Detroit Lions. But I mean, that would
still
be
the Lions,
a
man.
very,
still the Lions.
Yeah, still the Lions. It's a good selection though. I like some of the nominations. Dolphins Chargers, I think, could actually be an AFC championship because the Chargers always play Kansas City super close. And if there's a playoff game where it's Chargers Kansas City, it's not insane to think that Justin Herbert gets the ball last. And when you look at that Dolphins roster, if Tua can stay healthy and does whatever he did last year, that's similar. I think their run game will be better. I think their defense will be better. Like that team is a very serious contender. So I don't think that's insane. How about the 49ers and Steelers as a dark horse pick? Now, if that happens, then Kenny Pickett will 100% be that guy and have taken that huge step forward. But could the Steelers beat Kansas City, Buffalo, Cincinnati, one of those teams? I don't know. Looking at the week 1 schedule, I would say Browns and Bengals is kind of interesting. If Deshaun Watson is the version of Deshaun Watson from the Texans and not like the broke ass one who couldn't throw the ball more than 10 yards from last year. Turns out if you don't throw a football for like 2 years, it's kind of hard on the old arm. But if he was to come back, they have a good running game. They've got good receivers. They took the entire Vikings defensive line and then they added it to Myles Garrett. Like they've got a really good team in Cleveland. And then Cincinnati kind of speaks for itself for why they could be there. Also, Cardinals Commanders could be a great battle for who drafts number 1. That's an interesting one, but not for championship weekend. And the crazy one, it's I guess possible, but would be totally insane, would be Eagles and Patriots. If Bill Belichick found some new way to cheat where he could help Mac Jones know the other team's defensive calls by wiring the headsets or something, maybe the Patriots could get back. But I think, tell me what you think, Manny. I think there's a lot of great matchups here in week 1. I think we got a really good slate.
Yeah, I mean, the other one I was kind of thinking of, I don't know if I would really believe this would happen, but we saw the New York Giants kind of come in out of nowhere. I think how talented are the Giants? I don't know, but I think they're well coached. I think Brian Daboll's a really good coach. And all the pressure is on the Cowboys that this is the year that Dak Prescott has to like really finally get it done. And maybe that's a motivating factor. And somehow the Cowboys and Giants end up playing each other in the NFC title game. I don't know. Who knows? I think I'm not sure if that's going to happen, but if there's one that you kind of look at and say, okay, it'd be kind of crazy, but I could maybe see it happening if some things go their way. We might see the Cowboys and Giants. I don't know. Who knows?
I don't think it's insane to talk about the Cowboys in this context. I think that everyone just hates the Cowboys so much that you don't want to say that it's possible they go deep in the playoffs because it would be way too obnoxious. And a New York team, like think of a more annoying situation for watching television than the New York Giants and the Dallas Cowboys. But sometimes a random team kind of ends up running through the playoffs. It does happen. I just feel like the Giants are even more of a regression candidate than the Vikings are for this year. What about Bob says, I want to see Herbert prove that he is that dude after last year's so-so year before I take the Chargers seriously. The thing about the Chargers is that they are Vikings AFC. And you always just have to assume that the worst thing is going to happen to them and that they can't make the AFC Championship or the Super Bowl. They have had some sort of bizarre curse on that franchise since 1994. I don't know what happened, but they have had it arguably worse than the Vikings or just as bad from the number of times that they came like that close. And it did not happen. So Jordan says the Jets have an insane early schedule. Aaron Rodgers drama will be fantastic. Yeah, the thing about the Jets is that's exactly right. I looked at their schedule and was like, oh, you know what? If they don't come together like really fast right away and win, then they could be looking at something like 2-5 or 3-5, and everyone's going, what happened? And I'm a little skeptical of how Aaron Rodgers is going to look, Manny. Now, personally, I would like to lose myself like 15 pounds, be in a little better shape. Aaron looks like he's lost about 35 pounds from when he was at his absolute peak. This man looks like skinny and kind of old. And even if he's still got some arm strength, I don't know if it's the same Aaron Rodgers as it was before.
He kind of looks like a little kid out. At least looks like a little kid with a big, like, sort of salt and pepper beard out there, just like throwing passes to Garrett Wilson and some of the other guys. Yeah, I just, if they get off to that 2-4, 2-5 start, like what you were talking about, what are those press conferences with Aaron Rodgers and the New York media going to be like? It's different. This is different from Green Bay, Aaron, where you were kind of a god. You were the guy that followed Brett Favre and you lived up to the billing of following Brett Favre. This is different now. These Jets fans, they love you now because of all the hype and they're excited that you're there. But if you're not delivering, they're going to turn on you very, very quickly. They will boo you out of that stadium. And then the media will get on your behind about it afterwards. So that'll be kind of interesting to see if they get off to that slow start, how is he going to handle that? How is Robert Saleh going to handle that? How are the other guys in that locker room going to handle that too?
CJ says the curse of Stan Humphries and Introne means. Yeah, I don't know what they did. Spanos happened. I guess, yeah, that could be.
Yeah.
Jordan says Brandon Staley's ability to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory actually gives me chills. That game, I was hanging out with a friend in a restaurant watching that game against the Jaguars. And that's one of the most ridiculous meltdowns I've ever seen in my entire life. I mean, of all the like giving away the game, but they were just, it wasn't like a situation with the Vikings and Colts where the Colts were way worse than the Vikings. So you could understand why they came back. The Chargers should have been the better team against the Jaguars that day. And to give that away, it makes you not trust Brandon Staley really at all. Next hot route for you. Which quarterback, Manny, will no longer be starting by the end of the season and not for injury reasons? Which quarterback are you betting against making it the entire season?
My pick is Ryan Tannehill of the Tennessee Titans. I think that this is, he couldn't finish last year because he got injured, and the Titans really kind of fell apart without him, and they had a lead in that division, and they just melted down and ended up giving it away to the Jaguars because they had like Josh Dobbs and Malik Willis starting games for them late in the season. Now I think they went and drafted Will Levis in the draft. I think the thought is that they're going to try and groom Will Levis to be the quarterback of the future. They're going to try and develop him. And Malik Willis seems like he might be a lost cause. I don't know, but they might still try and see what they can do with him. I just have a hard time believing that Tennessee is going to stick with Ryan Tannehill for the entire season. I think it's going to get to a point where they're going to fall out of playoff contention. Maybe 2/3 of the way into the season, they're going to be done. And Mike Vrabel is going to want to see what the younger guys he's going to want to see what they can do. And, I know Will Levis has been dealing with a little bit of an injury during training camp in the preseason, but he figures to be healthy by then, I would think. And so we might be seeing Will Levis, if not Malik Willis, late in the season. So my pick is Ryan Tannehill will not make it through the entire season as a starter.
Well, you don't draft quarterbacks in back-to-back years in the top 3 rounds to have them sit and watch as you're out of the playoffs. I think that's a good selection if that team struggles. We have multiple different Russell Wilson picks in the comments. I mean, would they actually bench him or not and just let it play out? I think they probably would just let it play out. But if they're really bad, you could see it. But it's sort of like, who are they benching him for? Would be.
I was going to say, who was even their backup?
Is it still Brett Rippon? Like, I don't know if you're finding out. I mean, usually if you're going to do it, you're doing it just to sort of find out what somebody else can do. Or the other reason to bench a quarterback is if you're playing pretty well, but your quarterback is struggling, like Zach Wilson. So you bench him for Mike White. I think with Russell Wilson, they just have to let it ride and see what happens. But he could also be very cooked, and it could be quite bad. Whatever Cardinals quarterback screws up and wins a couple games is a very funny answer. I like that. Yeah, Josh Dobbs went 2-7. Get him out of there. We need somebody worse. Hey, that's what the Bears did last year. Like, Nathan Peterman was playing okay, and they put Tim Boyle in. Like, no. We need a couple of interceptions here. Sloth Baker could give up the job to Trask. That's exactly what I'm talking about right there, where if it's a veteran, but there's someone younger behind him, that's where you see a lot of benchings right there. Jared Stidham, who's he play for these days?
I just looked at it. I was going to say he's the backup in Denver. He's Russell Wilson's
backup in Denver. Okay, because I know he was with the Raiders, and I was thinking Jimmy Garoppolo might be another choice. So I wasn't sure if that was a thing that could happen. But okay, are you benching him for Jared Stidham? I don't know. I don't know if you're trying to find out, but maybe if it goes that badly, they might have to. Kind of like when Eli got benched for Geno Smith that one time, where it was just going so bad that they had to do it. The worst case scenario for any team would be if like the Packers or the Bears have to bench Jordan Love or Justin Fields, which I really doubt because I think that they're just going to keep going with it. How about Sam Howell? I mean, he's got Jacoby Brissett behind him. He's a
Yeah.
young quarterback. I am a Sam Howell somewhat enjoyer. I mean, I think that he's looked pretty good the times that he's played, and I didn't understand how he was dropped so far into the draft, considering what people had thought he was going to be. But obviously, if you've got a quality veteran behind you, that's possible. Brock Purdy bench for Sam Darnold. I like this selection.
Yeah.
That is they've just decided that Brock Purdy's a great quarterback. I think you need at least another year to know whether he's any good or not.
Yeah, I mean, and look, the 49ers are in win now mode. I mean, they're not, they don't have Kyle Shanahan doesn't have any time to mess around. If Brock Purdy is not playing well, I mean, Sam Darnold was drafted very high and he has not lived up to expectations, but he's capable. I think we saw him play, decent with Carolina late in the season last year, except the last game of the season he was awful. But we know he's capable, and we know that Kyle Shanahan has kind of shown that he can kind of plug any quarterback in there and they'll be productive. So if Brock Purdy struggles, I don't see any reason why they would feel like they have to have a long leash for him. You know what I mean? Because you've got a guy backing him up who's certainly capable of stepping in and playing pretty well too.
Jordan says Kirk if they pivot to tanking. I think that they would trade Kirk if they had to pivot to tanking, don't you? I mean, maybe there's no one to trade him to, but there's probably one team out there that feels like they're a quarterback away and wants to make that trade by week 8 is the trade deadline these days. It's pretty late into the season. There's got to be somebody who's got an injury, but it isn't so insane to think that the Vikings could have a tough start to the season. If they lose to the Bucks, and then you go to Philly, and then you got Kansas City and LA like come up. I mean, it can be pretty ugly, but I don't know. I mean, we already saw this scenario in 2020, Manny, where they went 1-5 and they didn't do it, and they fought and tried to make the playoffs. I still have a tough time believing that they would ever just yank Kirk or trade Kirk. That instead they would try to play it out until the very last minute, and then maybe if they were out of the playoffs, then they would play Jaron Hall or something.
Yeah, I mean, it's the Vikings are just that team, and we've talked about this for a couple of years now. There's not enough talent for them to be a great team, but there's enough talent for them to not be like the Cardinals. You know what I mean? So it's just hard to imagine. Like even when in 2020, the COVID year, when they started out 1-5, we were all just kind of scratching our heads like, this team should be better than 1-5. And then we saw them, kind of pick it up later in the season, and they dug themselves too deep of a hole that year. But it just seems like as long as Kirk Cousins is the quarterback of this team, they're never going to really have, everything just completely fall apart for them. Falling apart for them this year seems to me like it would be like 7-10 or 6-11 or something like that. I can't imagine them falling so far apart to where Kirk has to get benched or traded away, and then all of a sudden they're 3-14 and picking in the top 3 of the draft.
It just seems like anytime you have Kirk Cousins, it's going to come down to, do you win the last second games or not? Because they're going to happen all the time. I mean, I went back and looked at 2020 and 2021, and there were 25 one-score games, and they went 12-13, and then they went 11-0 last year. I mean, it's just weird, but I mean, so even if you go on that same sort of 50-50 and you go 6-5 in those one-score games, but the point just being that there's a lot of them every year. Last year, there were a lot of one-score games, but anytime you have Cousins, it seems like there's just always one-score games no matter what, and then it's how you do it in those situations. So you could see either a hot or cold start based on that. This is funny what Jordan says. Mahomes in week 5 will get benched just to beat the Vikings with their backup again. That right there, that game in 2019 when Matt Moore beat the Vikings, even though that 2019 team had a great point differential and they had a lot of strengths to that team, that was the one game I think we kept going back to and saying, I just don't think they're good enough because Matt Moore beat them in Kansas City. And if you could be beaten by Matt Moore, you're probably flawed enough where you're just not going to go that deep in the playoffs. But that was an all-timer. Harrison Butker with the big kick at the end. You had what? Wasn't it it was like a punt return or something that set up, or a bad punt that set up that field goal. So yeah, that was pretty memorable. Last year the Vikings did dispel that backup quarterbacks always beat them, though, because they beat a lot of backup quarterbacks last year. They will not have that advantage, I think, this year. So all right, maybe last one, depending on where we go with this. Which non-playoff team from last year makes it, and which coach is the first that gets fired, Manny?
The team that did not make it last year that I am 100% convinced will make it this year is the New Orleans Saints. I think it's almost by default. The rest of that division, I mean, Carolina is kind of rebuilding with a new young quarterback and a new coach. And they traded away some pieces to be able to move up to take Bryce Young, DJ Moore, sending him off to Chicago in that deal. So I don't think Carolina is going to be all that good, but I think that's okay for them. Atlanta, are they really going to roll with Desmond Ridder? And I like Arthur Smith, but it's like, you're going to go to Desmond Ridder? Okay, good luck. We'll see how it goes. I'm not sure about how that's going to work out for you. And then I know, Baker Mayfield's going to have some weapons in Tampa, but I'm not sure about Todd Bowles being able to lead that team to another division title with Tom Brady departing. That team was 8-9 with Tom Brady last year. I can't imagine they're going to be as good as that or better with Baker Mayfield this year at the helm. And I think that just leaves New Orleans with, New Orleans has the best quarterback in the division right now, Derek Carr, kind of by default. We know Derek Carr is not great, but he's capable, and it's a weak division. So and it's a Saints team that has a pretty good defense as well, good home field advantage in the Superdome. So I'm convinced that the New Orleans Saints, who were only a game out of the division last year, out of winning it last year, are going to take that division and make the playoffs. And it might just be like they might go 9-8, and that might be good enough for them.
Desmond Ridder also did not get a nomination for could be benched, but Taylor Heineke's the backup. So it's not like they don't have another guy who could play, and they might be desperate and then have to go to him. I also saw that at least by Vegas implied odds that New Orleans has the easiest schedule in the entire NFL this year. Now, that doesn't always mean that it's going to turn out that way, but just by the Vegas over-unders. But at least at this moment, their schedule looks pretty easy. Purple Haze is nominating Atlanta to return to the playoffs. I think it's possible with the roster they have. They have a good offensive line. They have tons of weapons. It's just that I can't get over that the quarterback is so unproven. I didn't even think he was good in college. And then he's a third-round draft pick and wasn't good last year. So that's a weird one. And Sloth says Arthur Smith has to win games at some point, right? Atlanta's passing on the QB this year makes you think they want the next coach to get his pick. Very possible. Arthur Smith does have to prove something there. He was a good running offensive coordinator with Tennessee, and they ran the ball exceptionally well last year. But, I didn't think it was all Marcus Mariota that it went as bad as it did for them passing-wise. And if you can't pass, that's going to be pretty tough. CJ also nominates the Falcons with Josh McDaniels first to get fired. Does Mark Davis want to pay two coaches to be fired? Would be the question there. Nomination from T. Kubler is Ron Rivera for the first coach fired. Could very much see that. Let's see. Did Cleveland go to the playoffs last year? No, they didn't last year. Cleveland could definitely be. That was going to be one of my nominations, is Cleveland going back to the playoffs. I mean, there's another team that you could nominate, but I don't think anybody on our feed here wants to nominate, which is the Green Bay Packers. The Green Bay Packers were a game away from the playoffs last year, and they were playing with an unhappy, angry, childish quarterback who spent the first half of the year trying to do everything he could to prove that it wasn't his fault, that he couldn't find open wide receivers, and that he wasn't going to listen to the coach and throwing a temper tantrum all the time. I think that Jordan Love doesn't even have to be that great to give them a chance to potentially make the playoffs. If things don't go great for the Vikings, if the defense struggles, if there's some injuries, a 9-8 from the Packers might get them in. Again, I know that everyone, what they want to see is that Jordan Love is horrible and that they go 3-14, but there is a world where he's good enough to get them to 9-8. And then they end up getting into the playoffs. I think that those are the best nominations. I mean, Los Angeles, I just don't think they're good enough. Cooper Kupp's got some problems. Carolina's like kind of intriguing because they won a decent amount of games last year with a combination of what Baker Mayfield and PJ Walker. So,
Sam
you
Darnold.
know,
Yeah.
I mean, they weren't even that bad. So I guess it's possible that could end up working out. But the other teams, I mean, Washington seems like a stretch. Of course, Arizona's not going to make the playoffs. Denver is a nomination, but I just feel like they have such an uphill battle there. Indianapolis would be really something if Anthony Richardson was good enough, or Houston. If suddenly the Jaguars weren't that good and one of those teams that are playing rookie quarterbacks shocked the world and made the playoffs, that would be a really interesting story. And since we don't have the NFL script, we never do know what's going to happen there. Let me jump to a couple of comments here from Zimbardo. I want to see the Vikings put somebody away once in a while this year. We have some good run blockers, so this is achievable. I agree. Last year in those one-score games, a lot of times they were winning. Just run the ball, get a couple of first downs, and the game is over. And yet they always left the door open. And I think they could improve the run game and have that happen. Horse Feather says Kirk will be Kirk one more year and be gone. Let him have it. He's a good quarterback, but just don't see us getting us to the Super Bowl. JJ certainly makes him better, though. Yeah, I mean, I think that everybody sort of decided that that's the case, is that he's just going to have that last year. Like, it's very unlikely, as you mentioned, Manny, that they're ever going to be bad enough to trade him away. 2020 was an odd situation, but they waited one more week, got a big win in Green Bay, and then got right back into the playoff race after that, as they just always tend to do. So it has brought up Mike McCarthy will be fired. That's an interesting one. I mean, if they lose in the first round of the playoffs and they have some idiotic play at the very end, you could definitely see that. I I don't know. I have a tough time figuring out too many other coaches. I mean, Robert Saleh, I guess. Kevin Stefanski, if it goes bad, Kevin Stefanski's done in Cleveland. If they start out a season really badly, it's not going to be Deshaun Watson who ends up getting that there. Let's see. Bob asked, do you see JJ getting an extension before the season? What do you think, Manny?
Before the season, well, we're what, 6 days away, right? I mean, I think if it's going to happen, that would mean it's going to happen in the next couple of days. I don't think it'll happen before the season starts, and I honestly think that that's okay, because I think Justin Jefferson is going to be a professional and he's going to show up. He's going to play because he's a competitor, and it's part of what makes him a great player. And he's going to show up and he's going to do his job. He's going to continue to be the best receiver in the league. And, maybe they work something out during the season, or maybe we go the whole season and it doesn't get worked out, and then it gets worked out in the offseason and everybody's fine. But I do think eventually it will happen. Will it happen before the season? I mean, we're less than a week away, so who knows?
Yeah, I think right now, just because we're so close to the start, I would lean toward no. But I guess I wouldn't be totally shocked, since Delvin Cook went all the way up to the start of the season. And you always just have to keep in mind, as people stress over everything, as they are Vikings fans, that he has a fifth-year option and the Vikings could franchise tag him twice if they really wanted to. Now, that battle can get ugly, and you can demand trades in public, and you can make this thing as ugly as you want to make it. But the NFL really baked in a hell of a lot of team control, and it's just favorable for a player to sign an extension, whether it's this year or next year. I'm also seeing some pretty ugly battles between players and their teams, and I do wonder about that. Like, is he going to join those ranks or not? I guess we will find out in a couple of days, but then there's still a whole off season to figure it out after this. So we might be days away. We might be far away. I think ultimately it just makes sense for everybody for it to happen. Manny, do you have a Super Bowl prediction you want to put down on our very first Hot Routes show of the season? What do you got? Who are you thinking?
I'm going to go. I think the Buffalo Bills are finally going to get over the hump. I think
Okay.
it's going to happen this year. I think I might have picked them last year when we did it too. I might have been picking the Bills for like the last 3 years or something, picking against the Chiefs, which isn't always very smart. But I think this is the year that it finally happens, and it might just have to take them getting home field advantage for once, so that make Patrick Mahomes come up to Buffalo and play you in the AFC Championship game. You know what I mean? Maybe that'll work out in your favor a little bit more. From the NFC, I would say maybe Philadelphia gets back there. I mean, it's hard to imagine why they can't. They got most of the same roster coming back. Jalen Hurts is a year older and a year better, in theory, and they're well coached. So by Nick Sirianni. So I would not be surprised if the Eagles get back. So I'm going to go Bills Eagles for Super Bowl 58.
I will go with Cincinnati Bengals versus Seattle Seahawks coming out of the NFC. I'm
Wow.
gonna go hot here. It's Hot Routes. I'm gonna go hot. I'm gonna say Seattle. I'm gonna say Geno Smith with the addition of Jackson Smith to the Jigba. I know he's a little banged up, but I think their offense can be really great. They've improved their defense a lot, and I mean, I also think that okay, San Francisco is good in that division, but they could win that division, and they could be a great team. And I mean, man, look at what Geno did last year. Like, I mean, what he was doesn't matter. This is the Rich Gannon situation from the Raiders. Like what he was in the past, it's really about what he is now and the weapons that he has. It's a coach who's been to the Super Bowl before. So, will they run at the goal line if they have a chance in the Super Bowl? That I can't see in my crystal ball. I don't know, but I'm going to go with it. I think that Seattle is kind of a underappreciated, really, really strong team this year. And I'm trying to pick, like a little bit offbeat from who went last year. I mean, of course, Philadelphia and San Francisco, I think, are the by far favorites. So I'm going a little bit below that, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, that would be a lot of fun. Maybe a last hurrah for Pete Carroll, and then maybe they get to the Super Bowl, win or lose. That's not a bad way to go out if you're Pete Carroll, and who knows, maybe he coaches for. I saw him on the Richard Sherman podcast a little bit ago, and he seems like a guy that wants to keep coaching for years to come. I mean, even though I think Pete's 72 now. I think 71 or 72 or something like that. So, yeah. Who knows that, Seattle could be interesting.
It could indeed. Well, anyway, we'll go hot to end the first episode of Hot Routes. So Manny Hill, this was fun. It's exactly what it's always been, which is great. And I really appreciate all of the audience participation too, you guys answering the Hot Routes questions, layering in some of your other Vikings questions and things like that as well. So great job to everybody involved. Appreciate you, Manny. Again, the schedule, the way it's going to be in the season, and there will be other videos that pop up. Monday morning Murph, Tuesday morning left guard with Jeremiah Searles on the YouTube channel and stuff like that. But as far as going live, the plan is to be live every night. Next Thursday is going to be weird because they'll be playing the Eagles, so we won't be live. I'll be in Philadelphia, but on the channel all the time, every night. So make sure that you are paying attention. I think Monday through Thursday is probably going to be how we do it. And then we'll see about Friday. I might want one night off. I don't know. So anyway, well, thanks, Manny. I appreciate your time. I will see you on Thursday night. I will see all you guys tomorrow night where it's Jonathan Harrison sitting in that chair, and we have a lot to discuss as well. So catch you all later. Thanks, Manny. And we're back, baby. Week 1 football.